Tonight all 5 stories share one thing in common. Every single woman in these stories believed she knew her husband. She knew where he worked. She knew who he was. She knew what their life contained. Every single one of them was wrong. And the moment each of them found out the truth will stay with you long after this video ends. 5 husbands. 5 secrets. 5 women who thought they knew everything. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. Story 1 begins. My name is Michelle. I am 44 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 14 months ago I discovered that my husband of 11 years had not been employed at the company he described as his workplace for the entirety of our marriage. His name is David. He had told me he was a senior project manager at a regional engineering firm when we met and had maintained this identity. The title, the colleagues, the promotions, the office politics, the salary, for 11 years with a consistency that I now understand required a level of sustained effort that I cannot fully account for without feeling a specific kind of awe alongside everything else I feel. He left our house every morning at 7:45. He came home between 5:30 and 6:30. He attended what he described as work events. He had a briefcase. He had work shirts he had dry cleaned. For 11 years. I found out because I sent flowers to his office for his birthday, something I had done 3 times before, always through a florist who delivered, always acknowledged by David that evening with a thank you and a description of how his co-workers had reacted. This time I called the florist to upgrade the arrangement, and the florist said they had been unable to locate a David with his last name at that company's address. And had I perhaps had the address wrong? I told them I did not think so. I called the company's main line directly. The receptionist could not find a David with his last name in their directory. I asked her to check variations. She found nothing. I sat with the phone after that call for a long time. I pulled up 11 years of joint bank statements on my laptop, and I spent 3 hours going through them looking for anything that explained where money had been going and where it had been coming from. What I found was that the deposits I had believed were David's salary had been coming from a business account in David's name that I had known about. He had told me it was for freelance consulting work he did occasionally, but that the business account had been receiving transfers from a separate investment account I had not known existed, and that had been funded, over 11 years, from sources I could not immediately identify. I hired a forensic accountant named Howard. Howard spent 2 weeks going through everything. What Howard found was that David had been, for the entirety of our marriage, a self-employed day trader and investment manager who had been consistently profitable and who had been living what he apparently considered a shameful secret. Not a financially destructive one, not a fraudulent one in any legal sense, but a secret rooted in a specific terror of being seen as someone who did not have a conventional career, and who had constructed the engineering firm identity before we met because he had believed at 26 that a woman would not be interested in a man who traded stocks from a home office. The terror had calcified into a marriage-long deception before he had found a way to exit it. I confronted David with Howard's report on a Tuesday evening. He did not deny anything. He told me everything: the trading, the investment account, the terror, the briefcase, 11 years of leaving the house at 7:45 and going to a co-working space across town where he had rented a private office for the duration of our marriage. The co-working space staff knew him as a regular. They did not know his wife did not know he was there. The marriage did not survive. I want to be honest about that because some stories end in couples therapy and rebuilt trust. And I think those stories are real, and I think ours was not one of them. What David had done had been financially harmless and emotionally catastrophic. And the 11 years of it had taken something from me that the discovery of its relatively benign nature could not give back. We are divorced. Howard's financial analysis confirmed that the assets were significant, and that the division was handled fairly. I have a financial advisor now who I found through a referral and whose office address I have personally confirmed. Update. 4 months later. David called me last month. Not about anything legal. Everything had been finalized. He called because he said he had been in therapy for the past year, and that his therapist had encouraged him to make contact and say something he should have said before the divorce was final. He said he was sorry, not for being a day trader, for the 11 years of a briefcase and dry-cleaned shirts and a co-working space across town, and a birthday call from a florist that had unraveled all of it. He said he had spent 11 years being afraid of being seen, and had spent the year since being seen by a therapist, and that the difference was something he wished he had understood before it had cost him what it cost him. I told him I appreciated the call, and that I wished him well. And I meant both of those things in the specific, complete way of someone who has fully processed something and arrived at a place where wishing someone well is available and genuine. I have not spoken to him since. I think that is probably the right amount of contact going forward. David left every morning, with a briefcase, for 11 years. And just like Michelle believed she knew what her husband's days contained, the woman in story 2 believed the same thing. But what she found was not a co-working space. What she found was a second address, with a second set of keys, and a name on the mailbox that was not hers. Wait, it gets so much worse. Here is what she found when she walked through that door. My name is Sandra. I am 41 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and 18 months ago I found a set of keys in my husband's desk drawer that did not belong to our house or either of our cars. My husband's name is James. We had been married for 9 years. The keys were on a plain keyring with no identifying tag, and sat in the back of his desk drawer under a folder of old bank statements. I had been looking for a pen. The keys were not hidden in any elaborate sense. They were simply in a drawer that I did not usually open. I held them for a moment, and then put them back and did not say anything to James that evening because I wanted to think before I spoke. I spent 4 days thinking. Then I hired a private investigator named Marcus. Marcus followed James on 2 separate occasions over the following 2 weeks. On the second occasion, Marcus followed James to an apartment building in a neighborhood 12 minutes from our house. James had a key. He used it. Marcus photographed the building, the unit number, and James entering. Marcus confirmed through property records that the unit had been rented for 6 years under James's name, which meant the apartment had existed for 3 years before James and I had gotten married, and had continued to exist for the entirety of our marriage without my knowledge. 6 years of a rent payment that I now understood had been the source of a line item in our joint finances that James had described to me, when I had once asked about it years ago, as a storage unit. I had believed him about the storage unit. I had not thought about it again. Marcus determined, over 3 more days of observation, that the apartment was not being used for another relationship. There was no other person. James was going there alone. He was going approximately twice a week for periods of 2 to 4 hours. He watched television. He ordered food. He sat in what Marcus described as a completely ordinary apartment, living what appeared to be a completely ordinary few hours of someone else's quiet life. James had a secret apartment where he went to be alone. Not for an affair. Not for anything criminal. For quiet. He had apparently decided at some point before our marriage, before we had met, perhaps at some foundational level of his personality, that he needed a space that was entirely his own and that no relationship had a claim on, and that he had been maintaining this space, at significant financial cost, across 6 years and a marriage, without telling me because he had not known how to explain it, and had not been willing to give it up. I confronted James with Marcus's photographs. He confirmed everything within minutes. He said the apartment was the one place in his life where he did not have to be anything for anyone, and that he had known it was wrong to keep it from me, and that he had not known how to tell me, and that the not telling had become its own thing over 6 years that he had not known how to address. We are in couples therapy. Our therapist has said that what James was doing reflected a profound difficulty with intimacy, and a specific terror of being fully known that the apartment had been managing at the cost of our marriage's honesty. I am still in this marriage. And I am doing the work of understanding what the apartment meant, and what it means that my husband needed it, and whether the person who needed it is someone I can build a different life with going forward. I do not have a final answer yet. I have a therapist and a marriage and a set of keys that are in a box in my closet, and that I do not know what to do with yet. Update, 4 months later. James gave up the apartment 3 months ago. He gave up the keys to the landlord and told me when he did it, and showed me the termination of lease document. I did not ask him to do this. He did it without being asked and told me afterward that he had done it because the apartment had been the thing standing between him and the possibility of actually being known by someone, and that he had decided he wanted to try being known. I held the lease termination document for a moment. Then I put it down and I said I thought that was the right thing, and that I was glad he had done it. We are still in therapy. The marriage is different from what it was before the keys, and I think different in this case is the direction of something real. And I am choosing to stay in that direction for now and see what it becomes. James had a secret apartment. He needed a place to be alone. And just like Sandra found something in a drawer, the woman in story 3 also found something. But what she found was not keys. It was a phone. A phone she had never seen before. In a jacket she was taking to the dry cleaner. And what was on that phone told her something about her husband that she had never once suspected. Let that sink in for a moment. Here is her story. My name is Karen. I am 39 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas, and 2 years ago I reached into my husband's jacket pocket before taking it to the dry cleaner. A habit I had developed after finding a pen had once gone through the wash, and found a phone I had never seen before. My husband's name is Michael. We had been married for 8 years. The phone was a basic smartphone, not a model I recognized as anything Michael had ever mentioned or carried, and it was locked with a passcode I did not know. I put the jacket down. I sat for a moment. Then I did something I want to be honest about. I took the jacket, with the phone in the pocket, to the dry cleaner anyway, because I needed time to think, and the dry cleaner was the reason I had found the phone. And completing the errand felt like something to do with my hands while my mind went somewhere else. I picked up the jacket 3 days later. The phone was still in the pocket. On the third evening after finding it, I placed it on the kitchen counter. And when Michael came home, I said I had found a phone in his jacket and asked him to tell me about it. Michael looked at the phone and then at me, and then he sat down. What he told me was not what I had been preparing myself for during 3 days of dry cleaning and waiting. The second phone was connected to an online community, a support group of sorts, for men who were managing depression and had found it easier to do so anonymously than within their existing relationships. Michael had been managing depression for 6 years. He had not told me about the depression because he had not wanted me to see him differently. He had not told me about the phone because he had not wanted to explain the depression. He had been in an online community of other men who understood what he was managing and who he could talk to without the specific performance of being okay that he had been maintaining in our marriage and in the rest of his life. The phone had no affair on it. It had no secret financial activity on it. It had 6 years of a man trying to survive something he did not know how to share with a person he shared his life with. I want to tell you what I felt when Michael told me because I think it matters. It was not relief, not entirely. It was the specific grief of understanding that someone you love had been drowning quietly in the same house you had been living in, and that you had not known, and that they had not let you know because they had not trusted that you could hold it. We went to couples therapy and Michael went to individual therapy, and Michael eventually told his parents and eventually told his best friend. And is 2 years later, someone who manages his depression with support rather than with a secret phone and an anonymous online community. The second phone is gone. Michael has a therapist whose name I know and a medication that is working and a marriage that knows what is actually in it now. I think knowing what is actually in something is the only way to know if it is strong enough to hold. Update 3 months later. Michael gave a small talk last month at a men's mental health event. Something his therapist had encouraged, and that he had agreed to do after significant consideration. He talked about 6 years of a secret phone, and about what the secrecy had cost him, and about what telling the truth had opened up. I was in the audience. I watched my husband stand at a microphone and describe something he had hidden from me for 6 years to a room of strangers, and I thought about a dry cleaner and a jacket pocket and 3 days of waiting, and about the specific courage of someone who spent 6 years hiding something, standing up and saying it out loud. He was not perfect at the talk. His voice shook at one point. He got through it. Afterward, several men came up to him and said things I could not hear from where I was sitting. He nodded a lot. On the way home he was quiet for a while, and then he said he was glad he had done it. I said I was glad too. I held his hand the rest of the drive. Some things you find in a jacket pocket, and some things you find much later, and I am glad I found both. Michael had been hiding something painful, and just like Karen, found a phone in a jacket. The woman in story 4 also found something she was not supposed to find. But this time, what she found was not about pain. It was about money. Specifically, about where money had been going for 7 years and who it had been going to. Can you imagine opening a bank statement and seeing a name you have never heard of? Here is what happened when she did. My name is Patricia. I am 46 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and 16 months ago I found a recurring transfer in our joint bank account that had been going to an account under a woman's name I did not recognize for 7 years. The transfer was $800 per month. Over 7 years, that was $67,200. My husband's name is Robert. We had been married for 12 years. The transfer had always been there. I could see it in the statements going back 7 years, but it had been listed under an account reference that I had never examined carefully because it had always been in the same place in the same amount, and I had processed it, on the occasions I had seen it, as something whose explanation I already knew and whose explanation I could not actually remember. I called Robert at his office. I read him the account reference. I asked him who it was. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said it was his daughter. His daughter. I had not known Robert had a daughter. We had been married for 12 years. He had a daughter he had never mentioned. The daughter's name was Grace. She was 22 years old. She had been born from a relationship Robert had had before we met, when he had been 24. A relationship that had ended before he had known the woman was pregnant, and that he had discovered, when Grace was 7 years old, through a letter the woman had sent him. He had not known for 7 years that Grace existed. When he found out, he had made a decision I understand, even as I cannot fully accept that it was made without me, to provide financial support without pursuing a relationship, because Grace's mother had asked him to, because Grace did not know who her father was, and because Robert had not known how to introduce this information into our marriage. He had been sending $800 per month for 7 years. He had been carrying this alone for 7 years. He had not told me because he had not known how, and because every year that passed without telling me had made the telling harder. Grace did not know about the money. Grace did not know about Robert. Grace's mother had been using the money for Grace's education, and had told Grace it was from a scholarship fund. Grace was in her final year of college on a scholarship that was actually her father. Robert and I have been in couples therapy since the bank statement. We are still married. The question of what comes next, whether Robert reaches out to Grace, whether Grace is told, whether I am part of any of that, is something we are still in the middle of, and that I am not able to resolve in a summary. What I can say is that I am in a marriage with a man who has a daughter he has never met, who does not know he exists, and that the $800 per month was the most complicated love I have ever encountered in a bank statement. Update. 4 months later, Robert reached out to Grace's mother last month, through a letter, written with the help of our therapist, explaining who he was and asking how she would feel about Grace being told. Grace's mother responded within 2 weeks. She said Grace had been asking about her biological father for 3 years, and that she had not known how to answer, and that a letter from Robert was something she had not expected, but that she thought was the right thing. Grace knows now. She and Robert have exchanged 2 emails. I have not read the emails. They are Robert's and Grace's, and I have been clear with Robert that this relationship, whatever it becomes, is between them, and that I am supportive of it without needing to be inside it. Robert showed me a photograph Grace sent him. She looks like him around the eyes in a way that is immediately visible. I looked at the photograph for a long time, and I thought about 7 years of $800, and about a scholarship that was a father, and about a young woman who had been asking about her biological father for 3 years. And about an email exchange that was the beginning of something that had been a bank statement line item for the entirety of its previous existence. I handed the photograph back. I said she had his eyes. He said he knew. We sat with that for a while. Robert had been sending money to a daughter Grace never knew, and just like Patricia found something in a bank statement, our final woman tonight also found something, but she did not find it in a drawer, or a jacket, or a bank statement. She found it in something her husband said in his sleep. 3 words. The same 3 words. Every single night. For 4 months. And when she finally understood what they meant, everything changed. This is the last story. And it is the one that will stay with you. My name is Catherine. I am 43 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. And 2 years ago my husband began saying the same 3 words in his sleep. Every night. The same 3 words in the same order, in the same quiet voice that sleep produces. Not dramatic, not distressed, just clear and consistent and nightly for 4 months before I understood what they meant. And before the understanding changed the shape of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My husband's name is Thomas. We had been married for 14 years. The 3 words were a name. A full name, first and last. A name I did not recognize. I heard it the first time and thought it was random. The way sleep produces sounds that mean nothing. I heard it the second time and noted it. By the third time I had begun writing it down, dating the entries, because I am someone who writes things down when something is persistent and unexplained, and this was both. For months of entries. The same name. Every night. Some nights clearly, some nights barely audibly. But every night the same 2-word name in Thomas's voice while he was asleep and entirely unaware. I researched the name. It was not common. There were several people with that name in various parts of the country, and I looked through each of them carefully, and found nothing that connected any of them to Thomas through any channel I could identify. I asked Thomas, one morning over coffee, if the name meant anything to him. He looked at his coffee cup. He said, where had I heard that name? I told him. He was quiet for the rest of breakfast, and then he went to work and came home that evening and asked me to sit down. The name belonged to a person Thomas had known before we met. A man. A man Thomas had loved, at 25, in the specific complete way that Thomas had not had language for at the time, and that the era he had grown up in had not given him room to understand, and that he had managed by building a life that did not require the language, and that had contained, genuinely contained, I believe this, real love for me and real commitment to our marriage, and also a foundational part of himself that he had never fully addressed because addressing it had seemed, at 25 and then at 30 and then at 40, too costly to begin. The man whose name Thomas said in his sleep was someone Thomas had not seen in 20 years. Thomas did not know where he was. Thomas was not in contact with him. Thomas said his name in his sleep, because somewhere in Thomas's sleeping mind a door that had been closed for 20 years was still occasionally open. And the name was what came through it. I want to tell you that Thomas and I are still married because we are and because the fact of it matters. The conversation that followed that evening was the most significant of our 14 years. Thomas told me things he had never said out loud to anyone. I listened for a long time. I asked questions when I had them. I did not cry during the conversation because I was too busy understanding, and understanding required everything I had. I cried later, alone, for reasons that were complicated and that included grief and love in proportions I could not separate. We are in couples therapy. We are building something new from what we found. Not hiding from it, not performing around it, but actually looking at what our marriage contains and deciding together what we want it to hold going forward. Thomas is also in individual therapy working on things that are his own, and that he shares with me as he is able. The name still comes some nights. Less often than before. I hear it sometimes and I lie in the dark and I think about a door that has been closed for 20 years, and about what it means to be the person sleeping next to someone who is still, somewhere in the deepest part of their sleep, standing at that door. I think it means I am in a marriage that is more honest now than it was before the word started. I think that is what it means. I am still deciding if honest is enough, and I think deciding is the right thing to be doing. Update 4 months later. Thomas has not said the name in his sleep in 3 months. Not once in 3 months. His therapist said this was not something to read too much into. That sleep is not a report card. But I noticed and Thomas noticed, and we talked about it one evening not as a conclusion but as an observation. We are still in therapy. Thomas joined a support group last month for men working through similar things, and came home from the first meeting quieter than he had left and sat for a while before he said it had been the first room he had ever been in where he did not have to explain the beginning before he could talk about the middle. I said I was glad he had found it. He said he was too. We had dinner. It was ordinary dinner, something I made, something he washed up after, the television on in the background. I thought about 3 words in the dark and about 4 months of writing them down, and about a conversation that had lasted until 2 in the morning, and about an ordinary dinner. And I thought that ordinary dinner after everything is one of the more remarkable things available in a marriage, and that we were having it, and that it was enough, and that enough, right now, was exactly what I needed it to be.